Hey, I'm Shana, just a human in Los Angeles, here to help you pick up the pieces after your breakup. I'm joined today by Lenore Shepard. Lenore is a licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist and a board certified health coach with a specialty in trauma, CBT for insomnia, as well as mindfulness based stress reduction. Hey, Lenore, how's it going today?
Good. Great to be here. How are you doing?
I'm great because I got a great night's sleep last night, and I hope that you.
All right. You're kicking us off to a good start then.
Yeah, there were many months where that was not very forthcoming. So I'm glad to be on the other side of that. Obviously, we all know that sleep is important, and who doesn't love sleep? It's funny when I'm with my little sister, we love to like nap in the middle of the day. We're like, sleep is so much fun. And it's funny because I mean, like, what's fun about sleep? You're not even awake, but we all love sleep, and we all know that life sort of sucks without sleep. In fact, it's a form of torture, right? To
Yeah.
deprive someone of sleep. So, could you explain to us a little bit, in layman's terms, why is sleep so important? I mean, why do we love sleep so much?
Why do we love sleep? Why do we even need to sleep? Right. And it's interesting because this is a topic of a discussion I just did a talk on, and it's something that's very close to my heart because I struggled with insomnia for a number of years. And when it gets to a certain point, you don't feel so human anymore, right? So there was many steps I took to get myself back on track again. And you're asking a really important question that's really stumped researchers for a long time. Why is it that we need sleep? We know all pretty much living or animals, right? Living beings need it. Birds sleep with half their hemisphere asleep, right? Aquatic animals, right? There's only one half that's actually asleep. The other one is sort of awake and be quite powerful. That's what humans did, right? But if you think about it, there's a lot of different theories out there, right? One of them is that we're conserving our metabolism, right? If we're sleeping, we're not out looking for a mate, we're not looking for food, we're not out sort of having to protect our home in any way, right? So we're conserving our energy and we're conserving our metabolism, right? So that's just one of the theories out there. But more importantly, it's what it does for us. And if you think about it, we spend about 30% of our life asleep, or we should be, right? The magic, I guess I would say almost ratio is getting between that 7 to 9 hours of sleep. That seems to be what's the most restorative and powerful for people. And why we sleep is because of all of the beautiful restoration that's happening in the body. So right now, there's multiple processes that are happening in the body. We have the circadian rhythm, right? That's going. It's this, every cell in your body has a little clock. And that clock speaks to the master clock in the brain, right? So there's all these things, cellular repair, right? Things that are breaking down, muscles that are breaking down that are being repaired again, multiple processes that are happening. And especially at night, right? When the brain is less active, the body is less in a state of acute sort of arousal, except for REM sleep, which I'll get to, right? So sleep is paramount for healing. We go through 4 different stages of sleep. They used to think it's 5, it's actually 4. First one is just sort of easing into sleep. First stage is we just to light sleep, getting into stage 2. Stage 2 is our blood pressure goes down. Usually the temperature also starts to go down as well. We also produce these beautiful things called sleep spindles. And these beautiful sleep spindles are what helps with cognition and learning. Stage 3 is the most important. That's when we get to the deep sleep. That's when we have these beautiful slow wave delta waves of sleep. That is when our lymph system kicks in, right? Different hours of the night. Maybe it's 1 a.m. the liver is starting to detox. Maybe 2 a.m. I think it's the spleen. So there's multiple things that are beginning to happen at that time. What's really interesting, and what's I think sort of the heart of this, is about 15 years ago they discovered that there's something called the glymphatic system. Now that is sort of, if you want to think about it as like a street cleaner for your brain. So the glymph system basically gets rid of detritus, gets rid of metabolic waste, as well as amyloid plaque. So when you're in that beautiful, deep, restorative sleep, and we go through these cycles throughout the night, that is when the brain can do basically make way for new memories and also have the make room for new learning. So just in a simple thing, if we've learned something and we get a good night's sleep, chances are it's actually going to go to our long-term memory, right? If we actually have gotten that restorative 7 to 8 hours, whatever it is. But if we don't get that, and if that's interrupted, we're not going to remember things as well. Things are going to be a little more hazy. So that's just part of it. And then stage 4 is the REM sleep. So during sleep, the first part of the night is when we get really the deeper sleep. That's when, the stage 3, is when it's really, you get most of that. It's about, again, we go through the different stages, right? And we do get some dreaming during this time as well, but it's more towards the early morning hours. And this is why a lot of folks wake up and they remember their dreams, because that is the state that we're actually remembering more. And what we found, and it's so interesting with MRIs, is that during that beautiful REM sleep, that dream sleep, essentially, if you want to think of REM, right, that rapid eye movement, that is when we're doing the emotional healing. So as a psychotherapist and as a coach, this is what I really focus on because I love sleep so much. I love talking about this. This is when the brain is, let's say you've had some kind of trauma. We're talking about breakups, right? You've had a breakup, you've had something happen, you've had a very stressful event, and then you go to bed. The brain during REM sleep wants to use, okay, we've had this event and it's going to go back in time to, is there something similar that happened in the past? Any memories that can be kicked up either from childhood or more from adulthood? And it's going to try and marinate these and to sort of make sense of it so that when you wake up, you're not as aroused, you're not as bothered by things. Clearly, it's not just, okay, if I go to sleep, I'll feel better, right? It's over time. But what's so interesting is we found with folks who have pretty severe post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, that if they are not, a lot of times they are not getting the REM sleep. And that is why, if you will, the trauma never has a chance to heal because it's still at the forefront of the brain. And as we've discovered this, we found medication that can help reduce as a neurotransmitter that gets kicked up at this time. And if we can help to sort of settle that, we're finding tremendous benefits with people who have very severe trauma. So taking it back to, what we're going to be talking about, which is breakups, right? If we can help ourselves get into a good rhythm of sleep, and we'll talk more about this, but especially that REM sleep, that is where we're working out the emotional trauma. We're working out things that have happened in the past, right? The brain is sort of trying to make sense of things. That's where we get to metabolize it. And over time, and we've found this, many sleep studies have actually proven this, that over time, the more sleep and the better sleep that you get, the faster you're going to heal from an emotional trauma. So that's just part of the things that are happening for us when we sleep.
I find that interesting because what's coming up for me right now is, one of the signs of depression, right, is like this constant want to sleep. And now I'm suddenly wondering, is that a natural physiological drive to get back to this like mentally healing space, and that maybe that the strong desire to sleep isn't just depression in action, but really maybe it's exactly the opposite. Maybe it's the mind seeking that deep healing space to actually take care of itself and help move past.
I like that. I haven't heard that theory before, but new theory with Shana Meyerson, I like that.
But it's really interesting, right? Like primally speaking, our minds, our hearts, everything is so deeply connected and has this sixth sense of the universe and what it needs. You could call it the subconscious mind, but it's funny because I always, like, 8 hours of sleep has always been my standard. Like if I have to wake up at 7, it's like I need to be asleep by 11, period. I'm wondering though, let's say, and again, this sort of goes back to what I just said about the sadness or the depression. And by the way, I'm sorry, I use the term depression. Sometimes I have, I think, a slightly different idea of depression than most. I believe there's clinical depression, meaning there's something in the wiring of the brain, and then there's circumstantial depression, which is just like, I'm going through a challenge right now. Yes, I'm depressed, but I'm not clinically depressed. But for these purposes, I'm going to just sort of like clump that together. I'm going through something that is holding me back mentally and emotionally. Um, so if I know that I am suffering from whatever trauma-induced insomnia, stress-induced insomnia, should I be planning on 10 hours in bed instead of 8 hours? Or is that giving into the depressive sort of element or forces that I'm trying to step out of?
So it's interesting. It's a multi-layered response to that. We've actually found that too much sleep can be damaging for the brain as well. So it's an interesting, it's almost paradox, right? And it's hard to get sleep researchers to agree on sort of what that quote unquote magic number is, right? It's usually 7, sometimes it's 8, but more than that can be complicating. Now, having said that, if there's any kind of medical thing going on, if there's any kind of medical trauma, or if you're healing from something, or if you have an underlying medical diagnosis, they may predispose you to needing more sleep. So, depression is tricky. Yes, the body wants to try and restore itself. Incidentally, we cannot make up sleep. People think, all right, I didn't sleep so well during the week, I'll kind of make it up on the weekend. And unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. We go to sort of the bank and say, okay, I didn't get enough this time, I'm going to make a deposit and then I can withdraw later. Unfortunately, it just it builds up.
Right.
However, and this sort of gets to a point that you're talking about, is the body is going to try and make up for the deep sleep, not the shallow, not the stage 2, but that deep, lovely restorative sleep. That's what it's going to try and make up for.
Right.
So folks with depression, and again, as you mentioned, it can be circumstantial, it can be something, that's sort of been a lifelong struggle, but typically it's either sleeping too much or not sleeping enough, right? Where it's basically the circadian rhythm is out of whack, right? The body is sort of out of whack, and it's sort of trying to find that comfortable balance for itself that's going to work again, right? If 8 hours is what works for you, that's great. And if you also see that, like, gosh, when I'm depressed, I don't get as much, or, a lot of times what also happens is we get sort of more shallow sleep, and especially after a trauma, right? Our mind is sort of still going. So just to sort of jump into something else, stage 4 REM sleep is also known as paradoxical sleep, because the brain is 30% more alert than when it is when we're awake. So it's really interesting.
Wow.
Actually.
Okay.
And what happens is, because think about it, there's a theory that, when our eyes are sort of going back and forth, potentially we're watching our dreams, right? But frankly, our muscles are paralyzed most of the time. There's some folks, unfortunately, who do act out their dreams, and some sleep medications, unfortunately, do provoke that response. But most of the time, we're not acting out our dreams. So, that's where it's happening. So, in response to your question about depression, really, it's going to depend on the severity of the trauma and the length, right? If it's a loss, if it's a death, versus a breakup, whether it was a healthy breakup, whether it was something that was expected or not expected. My role is always going to be, how can we help you get back to a normal rhythm again? How can we help you manage that stress response, the grief, the things that you're working through, right, to get you back to a sense of homeostasis? And that's sort of the bottom line. The body wants to get back into a state of homeostasis. Does that?
Yes, I think my question wasn't clear, but it answers a whole nother question. The question was really, if I know that it doesn't matter, 7, 8, 9 hours, it doesn't really matter, but I know that I'm waking up at 2 a.m. and I can't fall asleep till 5, I lost 3 hours. So what I'm saying is, should I ration instead of 8 hours, 11 hours, knowing that 3 hours in the middle is just lost? Or is it just like, basically, if I'm at rest in bed for 8 hours doing my best to sleep, well, that counts?
That's a great question that you're asking, and that's what people think, right? Well, if I'm going to bed at 11, but I know I'm going to be up for 3 hours, should I stay in bed longer? The actual question is no. Okay. And this is partly what I do for CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, is we look at what's happening in the middle of the night. What's waking you up? Is it nocturia that you have to go to the bathroom? Is it these obsessive thoughts that are waking you up, right? Is there some shallow sleep? You've heard a noise, or, something woke you and now you're having a hard time getting back to sleep again. What you really want to do, and this sort of gets to your question, Shana, is you want to help train the brain and the body to associate the bed with sleep, right? Not with, I'm going to sit there, I'm going to sort of mull over things, I'm going to ruminate, things are going to happen, and you're not associating with good sleep. If you're in there for, the extra 3 hours, sort of just waiting for sleep, you're sort of throwing off the circadian rhythm. And again, it sort of goes back to the idea, which always almost seems counterintuitive, that too much time in bed is actually not good for us, right? So what I do is I have my clients, even if they've only gotten 4 hours of sleep, I will start restricting their sleep in the beginning, saying, okay, I want to change your relationship to sleep. I want to change that relationship. Instead of those negative sleep thoughts, which is what we call them, we start talking about how we can start to precipitate positive sleep thoughts. And part of that is, okay, I may not have gotten my full 8 hours, but let's say I got, 5 or 4.5 hours. I'm still resting. I'm still in bed. And another thing too, that's really important is putting your mind into a positive state. And I know it's really tough when we're struggling. But one of the things that can be really powerful for people is, before they go to bed, is reading something powerful, either keeping what I call a worry journal, it's sort of in sleep parlance, or a forgiveness journal, whatever you want to do, ending on a positive note. What are you looking forward to? What do you love about yourself? What are some great things that you want to bring into your life? Because you're priming your brain so that when you go to bed, you're going to have these nice little sort of sweet thoughts that you're planting in your head, as opposed to, I'm no good. I'm so sad. Everything is my fault. All right. I'm struggling here. That's what the brain is going to look for. But this is sort of an override. Let's try and override this so that we start planting these thoughts, and it actually starts to work over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that whatever we think about before bed is generally what's going to manifest while we're sleeping, or at least it's what our subconscious mind is going to work on. I even remember this one time in high school, I was in calculus and I had this problem I just could not figure out. I was working on it for something like 3 hours. And finally, I'm like, okay, I'm going to bed. I just can't answer this question. And I literally woke up with the answer. I mean, I'm like, and that's the answer. Because I had been, ruminating. And so, yes, to your point, if we're thinking negative, painful, self-defeating thoughts, that's really going to, it's going to propagate while we sleep. And I love this concept of, I used to play with it when I was in college, when I actually learned about it. I haven't done it in a while, this concept of lucid dreaming, of sort of writing your own script for your dreams. And, like being able to literally step into your own dream. And when you get to a crossroad, like to consciously make a decision. So it's not even, it's a choose your own adventure instead of like a movie. But I'm thinking about what you said earlier about how when we're sleeping, it's when our mind is being creative and really creating new memories. And I think that's super important, right? Because the thing that gets us stuck in our breakup, or stuck in the stress or the trauma of our breakup, for many of us are the memories. The memories bring back memories, and they bring back memories. And so instead of like repeating this really painful or traumatic narrative, it's interesting that the trauma can literally get in the way of the sleep, which holds the answer to overwriting the memories.
That's beautifully said, Shana. I 100% agree. And if we could sort of blast this in the sky, skywriting, but it's hard though, because we're sitting there ruminating, whether you're the person who was broken up with, or whether the one, you were the one who did it. There's still that, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Because we're made for connection. We're made to be connected with people. And when there's that severing, it's very, very challenging, right? So some of the things that I help my clients with, let me just this is sort of important here, is there's two different kinds of insomnia. There's sleep onset insomnia, where you lay down and half an hour later, you're sort of still in bed, and maybe you've got that sort of racing thoughts that are happening and you're unable to fall asleep. Let's say you are able to fall asleep. Then there is sleep maintenance insomnia, where you wake up, but you can't go back to bed again. You've looked at the clock. It's like, oh my gosh, it's 3 a.m. I have to be up in 3 hours. What's the point of going back to bed? And then the mind starts racing about texts. And then, oh my gosh, right here I am feeling that sadness and grief again. So how do we start to pattern interrupt? And that's a little bit of what you're talking about too, right? Is the more we think about it, the more that we're creating these thoughts. And that's why it's so important to, this is something I talk to clients about, is we don't have to identify with our thoughts, right? Thoughts are just something that's just going around and going around. We have anywhere 20, 40,000 thoughts a day, and a lot of them are the same runs on repeat. We're kind of dull people that way. We just sort of keep doing this to ourselves.
Right.
So how do we pattern interrupt that? There's actually a lot of ways we can do that, but it's being proactive about it, right? It's being proactive after a trauma. You cannot talk about sleep or lack thereof without talking about stress and the stress response in the body. When we haven't slept enough, think about it. There's irritability, there's concentration problems, there's focus problems, there's recall problems, right? We're probably not the most fun people to be around because we're in a pretty bad mood, and there's actually reasons for that. We're hungrier, we're eating things that are higher carbs, and we're eating things because we're looking for energy. The body's like, I got to find energy right now. That is very similar to what happens when we're under stress, right? Where we're like, we're not thinking so clearly. And there's a few different types of stress, which I think is important to talk about. There's acute stress, which is, oh my gosh, fight, flight, or flee, right? Something's happened where, let's say you're going to work and you jump out of the way of a bus, right? And your heart's sort of thumping and, you're feeling nervous and scared, but then eventually the cortisol comes down again, right? That's acute stress. Then there's acute episodic stress, where we sort of can predict something's going to happen maybe every, few days, or when you go to your commute to work, it's always a certain part where you're going to run into the traffic, and it's like, I'm preparing myself for that. Then there is chronic stress, right? Which is just living in that space, whether, let's say you're in a bad relationship, you're, having a hard time at work and you're living there, or let's say with the family. And a lot of us are living there and we don't even do it. Right? 80% of autoimmune diseases rather are caused by stress. That's sort of the underlying thing. So how do we help get ourselves out of that? There's a lot of things that I like to integrate, because I bring mindfulness-based stress reduction into it, is checking in with your body throughout the day.
Right.
As think about it, it's very hard to go from going 100 miles an hour to suddenly, okay, I'm going to turn off the ignition and I'm going to just hope that within the next 15 minutes, I'm going to just be able to go to bed and sleep. And it doesn't work that way, right? The body needs seduction. That's sort of how I like to think about it, right? Of what we're going to be doing to help ourselves get sleep. But if you're living in this heightened state where you're sad, you're depressed, you're grieving, it's going to be very hard to sort of move into that. So doing check-ins routinely, where am I holding it? Where do I need to forgive myself? Where do I need to bring some more compassion to myself because I'm so sad right now and I'm feeling it? First thing is identify where it is in the body. A lot of women tend to hold it in our, kind of more intestinal area. That seems to be a big thing, right? That's sort of our second brain. Maybe it's the jaw, right? Maybe it's the neck. Maybe it's the head. Maybe it's shoulders. Start to identify where you're holding it, and then start moving around and doing some things that you can start to interrupt that process when you see that, because the more you can do that throughout the day, the less it's accumulated for you at night, because you're not going to be able to sleep with all that accumulated stress that's been happening, right?
Where do men tend to hold on to it differently than women?
It's interesting, isn't it? It's I am not exactly sure where. I know because, and it's a very good question. I for my clients that that I talk to, it tends to be more head and jaw. The reason I brought up more intestinal areas is that more women have IBS than men. And there's a reason for that. Irritable bowel syndrome is that we tend to hold in our gas, right? And we tend to hold things in because it's too embarrassing. Men, there's not as much, I don't know, there's a little bit less of that sort of pressure of like almost having to be perfect in some ways. And think about it, we wear tight fitting things, right? So we're kind of pushing in that area a lot, right? And it tends, maybe there's some gas that's been built up, right?
Yeah.
And that can also be, and we know this especially with women who've been sexually assaulted, that can be an area where it becomes very sort of tight, right? Because it doesn't feel safe not to let it go, right?
Yeah. It always, like, I always, as a yoga instructor, like to talk in terms of chakras. And I know this is so woo woo for so many people.
Oh, I love
I know
it.
it's not for you, but it's very interesting because these energy centers tend to be where we do hold on to these emotions, whether it's at our root, literally, like, say, like down at the base of the pelvis, which would be like, foundational issues like survival, right? And then
Yes.
you move on, and what you're talking about is second chakra stuff, right? Like our reproductive organs, which is interesting because those are the organs of creation.
Mm.
And I'll argue that all stress, all of this trauma is of our own creation. Circumstance doesn't create trauma. Stress doesn't create, or stress. We create it. We create it by our response to circumstance, which is why some people can walk away from a breakup and just be like, and done. And some people, and you could say this is attachment theory, but I'm just going to say, let's just boil it down to, it all comes down to what we have created out of what we've been given, right? And then right above that is the third chakra, is the digestive, right? How well
Mm.
can I digest what
Yeah.
comes to me, right? Can I take in the stress and say, okay, I'm encountering like a negative experience here. What can I learn for it? Would be like a healthy response. And then, our fourth chakra is our heart chakra, and our fifth is our throat. And I point these out because this is where I always feel all my stress. My
Mm.
heart will literally feel like it's dying after this last traumatic breakup. It feels like I picture the Grinch when the heart got really, really small into like a little tiny heart.
Yeah.
In our throat is our ability to communicate our issues, or how much we hold on to it, right? And the jaw is in between, but I would say that's probably throat, that's probably mouth, and our integrity also comes in here.
Yes.
And there's a
Yeah.
lot of questions of integrity when it comes to breakups. And then our sixth chakra up here, our sixth sense, our intuition, our insight, right? And then the crown chakra is really our enlightenment chakra, but it is more masculine, oddly enough, because it tends to be associated often with things like a god complex, right? Or an
Mhm.
overdeveloped ego, say. This would be like the narcissist imbalances, um,
Yeah.
to use a buzzword. But I think that if we can understand like these energies that all are associated with our spine, by the way, right? In the rise from the tailbone to the top of the cranium, which is no longer the spine. It really helps us to identify some stuff. But sorry, that was such a tangent. But let me go back to something you were saying, which is about about really connecting to the feeling. And I think that this is something that women do a lot easier than men, especially because men, as boys, are so often told things like boys don't cry, and they literally grow up to be men who believe that, which I think is very sad, because I think I heard a quote that I love, which is nothing grows without water. And
Mm.
I think that in the context of a breakup specifically, right, the water is the tears, and tears are finite. We tend
Yes.
to think like this is never going to end. It's like, no, if you just let yourself cry, even cry yourself to sleep, it will end. You will not be crying for the rest of your life, I promise. And it
Very
can be
healing.
really cathartic, right?
Yes.
Um,
Absolutely.
but there's the separation, and I've talked about this before, of the story from the emotion.
Hmm.
So, first of all, do you recommend for better sleep after a breakup that we go more into the intellect, the story, and sort of rewriting the story, meaning saying good things, thinking good things, being more forgiving of ourselves, sort of the dialogue? Or do you think that it's more productive for better sleep to separate this and go into just the sensations of the body and feeling that out? Or does it matter if you're more of like a somatic or an intellectually inclined human being?
Mm. I almost think it's a little bit of both. I am a big fan, and this is something I talk to my clients about, of trying to put a happy ending to things, because as silly as it sounds, it actually can work, and especially before bed, of um, trying to put a different ending on it for yourself, because by doing that, you're kind of trying to get yourself out of that thought loop.
Mhm.
But I think also what you're asking is where we're holding it. And I want to say, identify where you're holding it. Now, part of also what I will have folks do is, if, there's been grief, there's been sadness, and gosh, I'm lying in bed and I'm not able to fall asleep, is I want you to connect with the senses. I want you to connect with the body. And I will actually have people go and put cold water on their wrists, just to sort of refocus themselves, and try doing that, something that is taking you outside of the story, right? And it's taking you into the body, because that's so often what happens is we live up here, and the
Right.
body is what holds on to the memories, it holds on to the trauma. The body doesn't lie to us, right? If, especially as women, we are, I would say, we're a little bit more intuitive, or a little bit more tapped in, sort of. That's been kind of my experience.
Yeah.
But we've also been sort of taught, don't trust that, trust something else. And we sort of downplay that. Go in, where am I feeling this? Where can I bring some relief and some compassion to myself? One of the ways that I like doing this is a technique called havening. It's a really beautiful one, and I'm going to just give you just a quick demonstration, but it's sort of just putting your hands over yours and just stroking yourself, and just thinking, gosh, I love myself, and rehearsing or remembering what is it that you love about yourself, and just stroking the arms. And that just kind of way of self-soothing can help bring down that arousal and that cortisol level, right? That's happening. So there's a few ways that we can intervene with that. There's obviously breathing, there's listening to sleep stories, right? But if you're someone who, that your body's really holding on to it, finding ways that you can help to self-comfort is really good. Having maybe one of those long pillows that you can hug and maybe cry into, or something as well. Again, I go back to journaling and, keeping that. Another thing that sounds a little perhaps counterintuitive is setting time for yourself to obsess. It sounds weird, but you know, we all can have pity parties for ourselves, right? Especially after a breakup, and, feeling unlovable, feeling sad, feeling detached. Schedule time for yourself. And it sounds strange, but okay, 3 o'clock, from 3 to 3:45, I'm going to give myself that time to obsess, feel sad, feel sorry for myself. And what you're going to find is, over time, you're not going to need as much, because you've scheduled out that time for yourself. So what that means is, during the day, is distracting yourself and finding ways so that when those thoughts start to come back and that repetition starts to come back, say, no, I have you set for a certain time. I'm not going to let you intrude on me right now. You said something very important too, Shana, is that it's how we respond to stress, right? It's our stress response. It's how we respond to what's happening out there. Do we react, or do we respond? And it gets very easy to get pulled into reactive mode when we're under stress, underslept, right? We're not feeling ourselves. We're just very far from who we are. So these are some of the ways you can start to coax it back to yourself. And as you said, that sleep is going to be one of the biggest ways that we can help to restore and to start the healing process again.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so I'm a big believer in journaling, as you just alluded to. For me, it's very much just stream of consciousness. I write just anything, and it doesn't even have to be cohesive. Sometimes I might be writing to my ex. Sometimes I might be writing to God. Sometimes I might just be writing. It's just everything and anything that comes out. And also, I think it's great to write those letters that you're never gonna send.
Yes.
Just to sort of get it out. But do you have like specific prompts or even just ideas of things that might be more or less productive to be writing about? And I think also not everybody's writers. And some people, in fact, really hate writing. I mean, they just do. I don't know why. For me, writing is just an extension of speaking. But to that extent, I also like the concept of just don't write it then. Just say it. Just say it out loud. Don't think it. Say it in your head like you're saying a prayer. Talk to air. Talk to the person who's not in front of you. Talk to God. It doesn't matter. But actually verbalizing it if writing is not your thing. But I do believe that either one of those is going to be more powerful than thinking.
Yes, there's power in saying something out loud and hearing it said back to us, right? I don't know what part of the brain that we're triggering, but it's very different. And there's also something very powerful about writing, not so much in the computer, but having that attachment, holding a pen in your hand. I always recommend it. My clients tease me about this. They're like, yes, I know, Lenore, try not to write in the computer, but there's more of that visceral connection to it. You asked a good question about prompts. One of the things I advise is, what do I love about myself? And that's really hard, especially after a breakup, is what are the things that I love about myself? And as they're working through that, as you said, writing a letter to the person that, the things that they wanted to say, things that, what I was hurt by, and getting that out also is forgiveness. I can't stress enough how much forgiving ourselves is so important, because we think about, again, it doesn't matter if you're the one who was broken up with, or you're the one who, who broke it up. There's still going to be an issue of so many things are unresolved. But if we don't forgive ourselves for the things that we've done, for maybe some of the mistakes we made, for some of the assumptions, whatever it is, that's going to be very hard for us to move on, and we're going to get caught in this loop. So writing about it, talking about it, right? Getting it out, getting it into the universe, getting it out so it's not just being held inside of you, and getting it out there. There are also some really good prompts out there for, like there's all different kinds of, journals now, bullet journals, and also, wellness journals, and one's also about breakups. So that can be another recommendation to try something.
Yeah, I know that I became pretty obsessed, and it helped me immensely with my sleeping with YouTube playlists.
Yeah.
Also, the 528, I think, hertz music. That is like the healing music tones that I would just loop. I mean, it's already on like 8 to 11 hour segments, so you probably don't even have to loop it. But I would play that nice and quietly in the background. It did help to soothe my mind, but I really liked, there are certain breakup coaches, for example, that sometimes it's just their voice, sometimes it's what they're saying, sometimes it's a combination, that I would just like loop a playlist while I slept, but I would put it so quietly that literally I could hear it, but I could barely hear it. And then if I were to wake up in the middle of the night, I would think about it like, how you fall asleep watching TV? So
Yeah.
instead of struggling to fall asleep, I'd be like, okay, I'm just going to relax and listen to this voice who, by the way, is telling me something that I need to hear. So I found that like as a really productive tool for helping me sleep. And I have to say, I'm on a very different path right now. I decided really just in like the last week or so to just let go of this and to move into really just all positivity and all positive thought. And by the way, it's been unbelievable what's happened in just a week coming my way, how everything has shifted. So now I'm listening to like The Secret audio at night, or manifestation, or it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter what it is. For a while I was doing motivational videos. The problem is that they tend to like get really loud and get really quiet and have music and crescendos, and that wasn't helping
Yeah.
me sleep so much. So you got to also make sure you choose someone who has like a playlist that's nice and even. But I like the tones, or like anything with like singing bowls, or any of those like theta inducing tones, I think help a lot too, to just sort of
Yeah.
distract the mind in ways as it seeks sleep.
Yes. And that's great. It's really sort of a matter of experimentation, right? And finding what's going to work for you. Some folks, they just sort of need silence, or they have like listen to the ocean or listen to rain or something, right? But finding those things that are going to be soothing for you, getting out of bed so that you're not just lying there, you're not making that association that bed is just going to be a place you're going to lie in. Go to another room, find something creative to do, maybe take a, knitting, doing some drawing, something that's not going to be overstimulating for the brain, right? So that you're going to sort of arouse yourself. Listening to music, listening to a sleep story, listening to a math textbook because it's so boring. Hopefully that'll like kind of put you back to sleep or something,
That
right?
depends on how you feel about math.
Not exactly. No, you're right. Absolutely. But something, that's going to be sort of more, kind of mind numbing, so that you can sort of gently ease your way back into bed again. And definitely finding a playlist or creating something that that's been really soothing for you. Having a list of things too is going to be really important. So it's not just that you're creating that when you really need it, right? Oh, what am I going to do? You have a list of things that you can fall back on, as it were, right? So that you can use it. So when you're really feeling that, oh, I'm not able to go back to sleep again, I'm not able to distract myself, then you have things that you can come back to. And also what you're saying about the positivity, I mean, that's putting that plant that we're sort of putting that fertile soil, so that these flowers and these beautiful thoughts and these images can start to be manifest for ourselves. Because going into the negative, we just recreate more of that, right? You find that, if you're thinking negative things, you're upset about something, you keep finding things in the universe that's going to show you, yeah, you're upset. That's why, and it's going to keep showing you more reflection of it, right?
Yeah.
But if you start looking for the good things, that is going to start to shift things. One of the ways that I start my day is, what is the best possible outcome for this day? And I think about that in all different areas of work, of personal life, of my interactions with nature, of whatever it is. Set yourself up with good things and have that intention of the day. I've had a rough time, but I'm going to make this day count. I'm going to set aside that time for myself to feel sorry for myself and be upset. But what other ways can I find that I can show myself how much I love myself? Getting a massage, going out, talking to a friend, taking up a new hobby, whatever it is. But just being on that creative pursuit can do a lot as well.
Yeah. I don't want to be flip about this, though. I mean, you know me well. It's taken me a very long time, really a year at this point, to get
Yeah.
to this. So I don't want to imply that getting over your breakup and getting good sleep is as simple as just start thinking happy thoughts and everything's going to be okay. I mean, yes, it's absolutely the goal, but I have spent a year stuck in that really dark and in hopeless space. So I understand it a lot. And like you said, I had like a whole toolkit of things I still do that I do at night if I can't sleep. For it doesn't matter what the reason is. For me, and then I want to ask you a question about some of the things that you brought up, but for me, it has come down to staying in bed and just releasing the pressure of falling asleep.
Yeah.
So instead of sitting there being like, must fall asleep, must fall asleep, must fall asleep, I'm just lying there. I'm not attaching any goal to it. But then once I can separate the pressure, the stress, I don't need more stress. I don't need the stress of falling asleep on top of the stress of my breakup. I'll tell you that much. But for me, it's been a combination of meditation and breath work. And my favorite meditation personally has just been to pick a prayer that I really love and meditate on it. Now, for some people, you don't need meditation. For some people, it helps to just say it over and over and over in your head, and that's enough, just like a mantra. It will soothe you and calm your brain. For me, to meditate on a prayer means to think about each word or phrase, depending on the nature of the prayer. And by the way, if you're not religious, it doesn't have to be a religious prayer. It could be really any mantra, any affirmation that you create for yourself. But to focus on something that provides an answer. I've talked before about the serenity prayer. That is definitely my go-to prayer, as I feel it holds, boy, the secret to everything you need to recover from a breakup. And so if anyone's not familiar with the serenity prayer, it's just God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I feel like when it comes to breakups, I mean, it's everything. If you could almost list, like, what can't I control? Like, I can't control my ex's thoughts, feelings, or behaviors, for example. And it doesn't have to be that broad. I could start getting really specific. Oh, when he said such and such and such and such, and it hurt me, I can't control that. But the courage to change the things that I can, what can I change? I could change my reaction to the thing that I cannot change, right? And the wisdom to know the difference, because sometimes we get confused. It's even this concept of like, oh, I'm going to get my ex back, which I know is why a lot of people come to YouTube for breakup help, is to get their ex back. Fine, I've been there. But inherent in that is sort of a lack of recognition that there's two partners in a relationship, and your other partner's desire falls under the things you cannot change, right? So which is to say that I know that we discussed this before. You don't like the word productive, but I find that I found my insomnia a lot more productive, because I was really sort of marinating my heart in my mind in just the empowerment of being willing to change, and being willing to do what in wise enough to do what I need to do, and at the same time being gracious enough to give me the time and space that I need to recover, which again, I'm not going to pretend I'm like, ooh, and I'm okay, but it's been a year. I mean, no joke. And the other thing that I do besides meditation is breath work. And when I say breath work, I'm not talking about any of the complex stuff. I'm talking about simple things like counting 100 breaths, or counting backwards from 100. You'll find your mind just like is like, woo! And I feel sort of nice. You're rarely going to get from 100 to 1. And I know that seems like a big number, but that's fine, because that's only about a minute and a half probably by the time you got to 100, if you can just calm your mind and just focus on in, out, in, out. But that being said, I know, of course, and hopefully everybody knows that if you wake up with insomnia, that you do not turn on electronics, do not look at screens. Okay, so that I hope does not need. Even if you're listening to YouTube, we're not watching YouTube. But what I do want to ask you, Lenore, is when you talk about getting out of bed, for me, in doing something such as knitting, maybe reading or writing, or I'm not sure if reading and writing were under that. I don't, those auspices, I don't remember if you said that, but do we do it in the dark? Do we do it in the dim? Like, how do we know that the act of because to me, the act of waking up, walking into my living room so that I'm not in my bed anymore, is sort of like a tacit statement of, and now I am awake. Right? So where do I draw the line? Do I say I'm going to knit for 1 hour or up to an hour, and then I'm going to get back into bed, or I'm going to knit until I'm tired, or I'm going to read with a dim light and allow my eyes to be, do I lie down, but I'm in my living room? Like, are there parameters for that, or like, what's
there are. I mean,
the
the sleep research this comes out of a lot of research that sleep researchers, for lack of a better term, have done, that it's not productive, I'll use that word, for just us to lie in bed. And again, it's because the mind is going usually, right? The body might be tired, sort of tired but wired, but the mind is going. And the more that we're doing this, the more that we're just kind of lying in bed and having these thoughts, the more our body is saying, bed is not for sleep. Bed is sort of lying awake and kind of hanging out there. The reason that, we recommend people get out of bed, make sure there's a light so you don't trip over the cat or you don't trip over everything, and go into more of a dimly lit room where you can still read, hopefully not be on electronics, because that's going to suppress the melatonin, which we've taken a long time to sort of build up at night. But it's really respecting when the body's ready to go back to bed again. Maybe, you're lying there because you're upset. So give yourself some time, do some breathing, cry, listen to something that you enjoy. Maybe you want to watch a movie if that's going to make you feel better, but doing something that's just going to get you out of the bed so that the brain, the mind and the body can make that association that the bed is for sleeping. Sleep and sex. Those are the two things we should be using frankly, our bed for, not for reading, not for looking at the phone, not for scrolling through things. And that's why we say, try and just find some other activity that's not going to be arousing for you. Having said that, I also want to say something that I think is, what you've been saying is, it's time. Nobody, it's so, I always like to say, bio-individual of however long it's going to take us to get over somebody, right? It can be maybe a 10-year relationship and it takes, 2 years, it can be 15 years, whatever it is. There's no timeline, especially things like grief, right? It's all going to be so individual. So respect that about yourself. It's not going to be, oh, if I get, some better sleep and I start doing A, B, and C, it's going to happen overnight. No, it's in stages. But the more you can bring that compassion to yourself, because that's so lacking in this world, that sense of self-compassion, without beating up on yourself. I should have done this and I should have done that. That's where we get sort of that little tripwire that keeps going over and over things. That's just what can sort of start to lessen, right? So it doesn't become as harsh for us. And I will say, along with, if you're lying in bed and you can't fall back asleep, if you're also waking up multiple times in the night as well, that's another thing. If you're lying, sort of the rule of sleep lore is, if you're in bed more than about 30 minutes and you're just not falling asleep, that's when you want to just get up and go into another room and then just come back again. All right. Having said that, you also want to pay attention to when your sleepiness cue is at night. Most of us have something where we're like, 10 o'clock or maybe 11 o'clock at night, we start to feel like that dip, right? The sleep pressure has built up throughout the day and now we're starting to feel that dip. Try and pay attention to that, because if we lose that cue, it takes about 3 or something, sometimes more than that, hours to get it back again. So it's just one of those things that can be another kind of helpful guide of getting us into bed, hopefully at a time that maybe we can fall asleep. We may wake up again an hour and a half later, but maybe we've gotten some sleep and then we can, work on it from there.
Okay, we're gonna start to wind down, but I do have like maybe a little bit more of a technical question then. If I am suffering from insomnia after a breakup or any sort of trauma or stress, is it better to go to bed later when you're just feeling exhausted and maybe your body's like cannot stay awake? Like this would be a really good time to fall asleep.
That's an interesting question. So I'm going to go back to, again, what the lore, the sleep lore tells us is, if you can try and get into a regular sleeping pattern for yourself, you're going to get yourself back on track better that way. And it can be really hard. And I know that, with the feelings that one has, the sense of doom, right? The sense of, oh my gosh, waking up again, to that sense of sadness and that sense of isolation, that can be really hard. If you can, and again, it's work. And I always tell my clients, start with maybe 3 days a week and maybe work up from there, is try and prime yourself to go to bed around the same time when you can, and then getting up at the same time. What you're doing is you're trying to sort of reset the circadian rhythm again. And one of the ways that can be really helpful, let's say if you go to bed, let's say you go to bed at midnight, right? And you get up early, get that early morning light, go outside without sunglasses and go out there, because what you're doing is you're helping to restore that natural rhythm again for yourself. So, it's a tricky tricky question because, you want to listen to what the body's telling you. But if you want to try and get back into a regular rhythm for yourself, see if you can aim for maybe 3 days a week and then start building from there again. If you're, when you're able to getting better sleep.
Right. And so what just came up for me is thinking about when you fall in love, you're going to have insomnia as well, right? Like you're also like you're going to be up all night going, I'm in love, and like thinking about this man or this woman and how excited you are, and so it's interesting that both are going to sort of wreak havoc on your sleep patterns for very different reasons. As can any form of excitement or stimulation, whether it's positive or negative. So I'm thinking about, I know so many like super achievers in this world, just brilliant minds who just are running the show. They're all over the place. And in general, they're sleeping about 4 hours a night. They are just, theoretically they're running on fumes, but I could probably use a better word like adrenaline. But when we've got all these, whether they're stress hormones, whether it's, the actual cortisol, the adrenaline, that whatever it is that's pumping through your veins, is that nature's way of compensating for missed sleep? Like, is there any way to say, yes, I got 4 hours of sleep, but when this energy kicks in, okay, whatever form it is, right? The stress hormones, let's say, that put us in the, let's say, fight mode, not the flight or freeze so much, because that's going to sort of set us back. But in a way, is it compensating in a positive? Like, is that nature's way of saying, okay, you didn't get the sleep, but I'm going to give you this extra burst of energy to compensate for that?
Depends how long it lasts. So when we wake up in the morning, typically it's when our cortisol starts to go up, right? That's the awake hormone, melatonin has dropped off, and that's when we're getting our energy and kind of getting moving with things. If the cortisol stays high throughout the day, that's not what we want. That has implications for the heart, it has implications for the lungs. There's a lot of things that actually are not good, good for it. I will say that 4 hours of sleep is not enough. There's been some, I think it was Reagan and I think also Margaret Thatcher who boasted about needing, 4 hours of sleep. Incidentally, they both got Alzheimer's, right? So I'm not saying there's a causation there, right? But it's part of the thing with the glymphatic system of getting rid of the amyloid plaque, which can start to build up again in the brain, right? So we really know that 7 hours is what's going to really, that 7 to 8 is what's going to help the brain and the body function more optimally. Yes, there's people who are super achievers. There's tons of them in the world who can do amazing things, maybe, but we also don't know how much sleep they are actually operating on. I would argue probably more than we might actually think to give them that energy, right, for it. So you, in terms of where are we getting the energy from, you don't want that cortisol staying high, right? So it's interesting because one of the, with folks who have insomnia, right, who aren't sleeping so well, the number one thing is their mood is poor mood. It's not drowsiness, actually. So the brain and the body have ways of compensating for this. Right. Not so much with the caffeine, right? But there's other ways that we can compensate up to a certain point. Is that answering your question?
Yeah. And poor mood, by the way, is just going to continue us down on that downward spiral that has already been perpetuated by the stress that we've created around the narrative of our breakups. So, I mean, obviously, and for many reasons, both psychological and physiological, it's just so important that we find what works for us to get the sleep that we need to remain healthy. And I'm the first to attest that is not always easy, but with the help of a coach like you and with the cognitive behavioral therapy that you offer for insomnia, do you offer counseling, therapy online, on Zoom? Is it only in person? Like, can you tell just a little bit, like, where can people find you if they want
Sure.
more specific and personalized help in helping them with their trauma-based insomnia?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just to say I have as a social worker, I've had more than 20 years experience working with folks. Really background is in medicine on and also trauma. So I'm very steeped in this. And I do both via Zoom and in person in my office. I see folks CBTI, which is great. You can either do it via Zoom, it works fine Zoom, and it also works well in person as well. So I do a combination of both. And I have a separate coaching practice than I do for my psychotherapy practice. So it's two different ones. One thing I wanted to just before we wrap up is just to show folks that, your listeners may already know about this, but it can be a helpful thing to do when our stress is at a really heightened point, is something called the physiological sigh. And what's interesting about it is it's something that it's sort of replicated when we're crying, right? That we automatically do. And it's sort of 2 inhales and 1 long exhale. And think about it when you're crying, right? We're doing this already. And it's something that folks have discovered in the 1950s that we were already doing. Neuroscience has shown us that's the fastest way that we can bring down that arousal level. And I like to take it a step further because I've also studied energy medicine. So when you're acutely stressed out about something, about 80% of the blood leaves your core brain, right? Because we're not thinking clearly, we can't focus. All of a sudden, we're faced with something. The tips of your fingers are magnetized and your blood is magnetized. So just by putting your hands here, which is what we tend to do when we're stressed out, and having your thumbs on your temple, and then just doing it a couple of times, you can actually start to feel, and if you do it a few times, you can actually start to feel some of that heightened stress response start to go down. And I actually do it with my clients and have them do it throughout the day. And it sounds counterintuitive that I have them put an alarm for themselves, but it's another way that we can help to bring down our stress response. So I just
Wow.
wanted to mention.
Thank you. That's such a cool tool. Well, Lenore, thank you so much for your time today. You've been so generous with it. And where are you located?
So I'm actually in Northampton, Massachusetts, and you can find me at my website, which is coachingwithlenore.com.
Perfect. Okay. Have an awesome day, and we will talk again soon.
Sounds great. Thank you.